Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. Today I want to show you all the books that I took with me to Slovenia, which is basically just my entire TBR, because I couldn't decide which ones I did not want to read this year. If I calculated this correctly, there are 64 books that I took with me into my room of 7 square meters, which means that they take up a lot of space. Genre-wise, there are 12 fantasies, 15 classics, 3 historical fictions, 24 non-fictions, where I also like, that's also a biography, some history stuff, just everything that could count as non-fiction, and 10 contemporary, which I also included like literary fiction or romance books or anything like that, like anything that is set in the modern world, in this world, just because otherwise would have like one literary fiction book, one romance book, and so on. That would just be too many categories for my 64 books. I know that having all of these books is a privilege. I know that a lot of like booktubers have even more, or booktokers or whatever you usually follow. I don't think that you need to own books to be a reader. I think that as a community we do have kind of an overconsumption problem, especially considering that in many countries there are a lot of like public libraries. Collecting books and reading books is really two different hobbies. If you only read on your phone or Kindle and don't own a single book, you're still a reader. Also, I haven't entirely figured out my filming situation yet because the light's coming from there, but there's just white walls. I think I might just hang something up, but for today we'll have to deal with it like this. That being said, let's look at some books. Oh no, I forgot a book. No, I forgot 2 books. So yeah, I got 66 books, of which 26 are non-fiction. When I started university, I already had most of these books, like I bought most of them in the years before when I had a bit more money. But during my university time, I mostly had fiction because I'm already reading a lot of non-fiction for university, and that's why there seem to be so many non-fiction books. So I want to start with the fantasy genre just because they're like right next to me. The first one is The Hunger of the Gods by John Gwynne, and this is the second book in a trilogy. I read the first one 3 years ago now. I think it's been it's been 2 years because it was shortly before I started university. I read it in Norway, which is a great place to read this. It's set in this kind of cold tundra-like world where people can go berserk. I can't really tell you much more anymore about this because I do not remember too much about the first book except that I loved it. And there's one character specifically that I liked a lot because it was a female character that loses her child and husband. I feel like female characters that lose their children are heavily underrepresented, at least in the books I read. And I think that was a very interesting perspective. I have a very bad memory, but like the emotions that are connected to the first book are still there, and I am looking forward to continuing with it. And I think I want to continue with it actually this winter because this is a very like wintry kind of series for me. And it's also inspired by some Norse mythology, and as I said, it's just set in a very wintry like world. I can't tell you anything about the second book. In English this is called The Left-Handed Bookseller of London by Garth Nix. In German it's called Die magische Buchhändler von London, which would translate to the magical booksellers of London. It just says on the back that booksellers were always known as like the protectors and spreaders of wisdom or knowledge. And then there's a blurb. Honestly, I don't think I want to know much more about it. The next book is A Day of Fall Night by Samantha Shannon. This is the prequel to The Priory of the Orange Tree, which I loved. It was one of my 5-star books in the recent years. It seems to be about the priory and its worms, which I think is just a fancy way to say dragons without wings. I know it's a different thing than a dragon, but it kind of also isn't. And I think it just plays a few centuries before A Priory of the Orange Tree. Very much looking forward to this as well. However, she's a big one. You know, you probably need like a REM certificate for this. You could also just continue with the one that I'm currently reading, which is The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. It's about Quoth and his life story, about this world where something exists that is called sympathy, which are basically magical powers. Quoth is the son of like a wandering group of musicians and entertainers, and he loses his family, and then we follow him being first a begging boy and then going to university, defeating the odds, and being basically one of the most gifted people around. I'm really loving it. I this could be another 5-star for me this month, which I almost never get 2 5-stars in a month, but yeah, also the language in this book is fantastic. It's so magical while also being so comprehensible. It's not like over the top. They don't speak like they would have in medieval times, but they speak in a way that makes sense for a world without technology, without our slang, without our social media influence. Because that's sometimes something that people forget in fantasy books. Next one is one I got gifted by my father. This is also more of a wintry book, I think, because this also apparently includes a lot of Norse mythology. I also want to read this month as part of the Magical Readathon. It's called Nordblut Wolf wie wir by Mira Valentin. It would translate to like Northblood, wolves like us, but I don't think this exists in English. The only thing I know is that it plays on Iceland in like the 10th century. There are some magical elements, some Norse mythological elements. Next one was quite big on YouTube. It's called Jade City by Fonda Lee. I thought that it's something to do with like mafia, but in a fantasy setting. I've never got anything including a mafia. I don't know anything more, but everybody was raving about it, so I decided to get it myself. Next one I got to practice my French a bit. It's called Le Pas de Merlin. Le Pas de Merlin. I'm not sure how you would say Merlin in French. By Jean-Louis Fidjon. I hope I said that correctly. My French really isn't that good. I can read it, I can't really speak it. But I try to keep up a bit with the language by reading in French from time to time. I don't know what this is about, except that I read the word Merlin, and I was very much in my BBC Merlin phase at that time. And it was on like a secondhand online bookstore in Germany for €4 or something. Next one is a Spanish one. I also don't really speak Spanish as well, but I try to practice it by consuming some form of media from time to time. I don't know if it's actually working, but I can understand actually quite a lot. I just can't speak or write it. This is the first Harry Potter book, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone or Philosopher's Stone, depending on where you're from. In Spanish it's called Harry Potter y la Piedra Filosofal. This is a gift by my brother. Actually, this is only like a year old, which is fine. This is a Game of Thrones, A Song of Ice and Fire by George R.R. Martin. Game of Thrones, not something that I've read yet. I did see the first season. I know that it's about like the Stark family and it's also very wintry vibes. Apparently a lot of my fantasy books have like a wintry feeling to them. So I guess I'm gonna read a lot of fantasy this winter. There's some like hereditary war. I don't know how close to the book the adaptation actually is. We're gonna figure it out. But I like this edition because it has a map and it also has like one of these bookmarks, like strings in it. So yeah, I like this edition. Thank you to my brother who's never going to see this. Then we got the third part in the Farseer trilogy called Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. The Farseer trilogy follows Fitz, the bastard son of the late heir to the throne. His biological father has died and he is kind of taken in by the royal family, but he's also not part of the royal family. Everybody essentially knows that he is a bastard, that his father cheated on his wife and he was the result of it. So he is treated kind of poorly, but he's also taken in as an apprentice to be an assassin. He makes a lot of enemies, he makes some friends, and I won't tell you where we are at in the third book because that would be like a huge spoiler, but I would recommend the first one a lot. It's not that long actually, so if you realize that you don't like it, you wouldn't have to stop in the middle of like a, what is this, 800-page book. You can just, like, it's I think half the size maybe. So yeah, read the first one and then decide if you want to continue on. I would highly recommend it and I'm very much looking forward to this one. Okay, so the next fantasy books are part 1 and part 2 of a Chinese fantasy series by Jin Yong. The first one is called Die Legende der Adlerkrieger in German. I will have to Google what these are called in English. And the second one is called Der Schwur der Adlerkrieger. From what I know, this is about betrayal, but about like the children of people who have betrayed each other or something. I just heard the word betrayal and was immediately like, I need this. I need the book. And my mother actually gifted me the first 2 books, even though usually I try to only get the first book in a series, because if I don't like them, then I won't continue with them. But now I got the first 2 books, so I'm only missing one. The third one. So I kind of want to read these back to back, which is why I haven't started them yet, because they're both very big and I just have to be in the mood for this, for so much fantasy. But I'm very much looking forward to reading these as well, which I feel like I'm saying that about every single book. I wouldn't own them if I wasn't looking forward to reading them. Okay, that's the fantasy books. Let's continue with historical fiction, because those are only 3. So while we were already talking about betrayal, I own a book called The Partisan by Patrick Vogel. I haven't actually seen anybody talk about this, maybe because I don't watch a lot of booktubers who also read historical fiction. This is set in the time of the Cold War. 2 people meet during a chess tournament, and they are apparently being shadowed by a Lithuanian resistance fighter and also a Soviet Union's spy master. And there seems to be a lot about friendship, but also about like who you could trust in a time of impending war, in a time where you don't know if the next day you will be attacked. And these very ordinary people, they seem to be like chess geniuses, but they aren't themselves involved in any of the Cold War procedures, at least from what the blurb can tell me. So I thought following these 2 around, also I like reading about the Cold War, but following these 2 around might be very interesting because it's more ordinary people involved in not ordinary things. Next one is by one of my all-time favorite authors. This one wasn't translated into English, but it's called Teufelskrone by Rebecca Gablé. Teufelskrone would translate to Crown of the Devil. This one plays at the end of the 12th and the beginning of the 13th century, so like ending of medieval times. This is part of the Worringham Chronicles, her historical fiction series that follows this fictional family throughout the centuries. However, the events that happen in these books have largely actually happened, and you meet a lot of characters that did exist. This is called Son of the Century by Antonia Scurati. It's an Italian name. I don't speak Italian. This follows in some way Benito Mussolini. I don't know if we start at his childhood or when he's like coming to power. I bought this when I was in Italy, and I like buying books about some form of history there, if it's like historical fiction or non-fiction. And I bought this like 4 or 5 years ago and I still haven't read it. But yeah, that's that. At some point I will get to it. That's historical fiction. I think we're going to continue with classics, because like historical fiction, classics, makes sense in my head. So we still got The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexandre Dumas, part 2. I finished part 1. I think I finished it in my first ever reading vlog. I liked it, but I wasn't able to continue this yet. This is probably going to be the first book I read in October when the magical readathon is over. Then we have Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This follows Pip. I think Pip is like an orphan who, I know that he's very poor, and that this is a lot about like capitalism and things like those. I've read A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I kind of liked it. It wasn't like my favorite book ever. It was just fine. It was what it said on the cover. But I bought this also like 4 years ago, I think, because of the cover. And also it's got like silvery pages. In Germany, the sprayed edges only started being a real thing like 3 years ago. So this was a novelty for me back then. This was something very special. Nowadays you see a lot of sprayed edges in Germany. Then we got Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe. I know that this was written during the Civil War, and it's about a slave. I think he's freed or he frees himself. Maybe he flees. I actually don't know too much about this. I think that this is something that just is very important to like the history of the US, and just in general it seems to be a book that I should have read at some point. Okay, let it change in lightning because it is getting kind of dark outside. The next one is just some Swiss fairy tales. I got this like second, probably third hand honestly, but for very cheap. Oh, there's a map inside. Wait, no, there are drawings inside. Apparently, there are little drawings inside of this. Didn't know that. Then we got The Beautiful Cassandra by Jane Austen in these black penguin, like penguin little black classics editions. This was a gift by my former neighbor actually in Passau, because he read one of the Jane Austen books. I think he got Persuasion and decided that they were not for him, and so he gifted me this one that he already owned. And these are just some short stories from like her very early youth, teen years that she mostly wrote for her family. Actually, I don't know if she decided that these should be published. If she did not want these to be published, I don't know, I always feel bad when authors get works published that they didn't want to be read by strangers. These are very short. I think this only has like, this is 55 pages. I've already read Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen and also Letters to Her Niece, which were in the collection of texts by female authors that I own. Then we got Franz Kafka's Letters to Milena. Franz Kafka, I think, is a very well-known author. He's also known as this kind of ambiguous figure. He wasn't good with women, he wasn't good with anybody really. I haven't read anything by him yet, but I was told that his letters are actually quite beautiful. Apparently he wrote these while he was in a hospital for syphilis or some kind of illness. And Melina was kind of this person he wrote a lot of letters to. There might have been some romantic connections, but I'm not sure about that. Then, even though I've already got this, I also want to reread Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, because when I read this I was 16 years old, and I think I wasn't the dumbest 16 years. I did get quite a lot, but nowadays that I know more about Austen's own life and her own views, and a lot of her books are actually more of like a parody of the times that she lived in. At least that's what I think. And this whole, there's this rich man and you have to marry him and they always marry him, that's more of like satire at this point, I think. Actually, I think Jane Austen was like very smart in her texts because she was able to hide the satire. This is about Elizabeth Bennet, who meets Mr. Darcy, I forgot his first name. They develop this very reluctant love. They don't want to be in love. It's very obvious. Mr. Darcy is very rude to Elizabeth, and Elizabeth is also kind of not nice. She's also, I don't want to call her a bitch, but at some point you're just gonna be sitting there like, as I said, I've already read this. I got this in the Penguin edition, and this is the Wordsworth Classics edition, and this one actually has little drawings inside. I'm always happy when I find like drawings inside my books. My mother got me this one. Then we got the Brothers Karamazov by Dostoevsky in the German edition. I don't know what this is about. I kind of don't want to know what this is about. I also kind of went blind into War and Peace, which I know is by a different author, but they're both Russian literature. I've heard a lot of people raving about this and I want to know what's going on, but I don't want to read the blurb for it. Then we got Hamlet by Shakespeare. Listen, I got Macbeth when I was 16. I think I was a lot smarter at 16 than about 21. I loved Macbeth. I don't even know if I got everything, like if I understood everything. It's Shakespeare, I'm German, and even people whose first language is English have trouble reading these, which is mostly why I get them in the Oxford World's Classic editions, because these always have like a very long very long introduction and a lot of explanations at the bottom of the pages, and also some more like some appendixes I think, and that just explains a lot that I wouldn't understand otherwise. Hamlet is about the crown prince of, I think, Denmark, and his father dies, I think, and then his mother remarries immediately. I think she actually remarries the brother of Hamlet's father. And there's some murder in this because there's always some murder in Shakespeare. Like, not always, I think. But a lot of the times there's just some murder in this. I think I once saw a graph on how people die in Shakespeare plays and most are just stabbed to death. The next one we got is Matilda by Mary Shelley. It's also in these Penguin Little Black classics. I've already read this, actually. I didn't like it too much. It was like a 3-star. If you want to hear more about my thoughts about this, you should either check out my reading blog for this or just wait until I do my September reading wrap up. The next classic we got is just a collection of works by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, there's a font in there. He's basically Shakespeare but in German. Like, he's not as famous as Shakespeare because Shakespeare is famous all over the world, but Goethe also called a lot of German phrases. He's the poet that you have to know if you are from Germany. So these are just some collected works, some poems, some ballads, some prose. I think I want to read this in one go because you could just split it up into the different works, but I think I want to read this in one go. Then we got another famous, I think, German, at least German speaking, well, Germany didn't really exist back then. Also, Goethe wasn't really like German because Germany didn't exist back then, but today we would say German. Poet, writer, called Friedrich Schiller, and this book is called Maria Stuart, which some of you might recognize as an English queen or a Scottish queen. I think she was Scottish, actually. I had to read Will and Tell for school, which is also by Friedrich Schiller. I think I read it too early, honestly. I think I would like it more now. That's why I got this one. It was also very cheap. It was secondhand in some library. Then we got some German myths of gods and heroes, maybe. I'm gonna go with that translation, by Kurt Eigel. This is just a collection of like Germanic mythology, which is very similar to Norse mythology. The next one is Paradise Lost by John Milton. I've seen someone describe this as Bible fan fiction, which, from what I know, seems to be correct. It's written in like verses, and it's also got a lot of explanations, which is nice because I'm probably not gonna get it otherwise. Next one is The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald. No, I have not read this. I know. It's set in the 1920s. I know that one of my friends really liked this and another friend really hated this. And the one that liked this I usually don't agree with. Though apparently the biggest issues that the other friend that didn't like this had was the anti-Semitism. Which I don't want to say that I'm used to it in books, but if you read a lot of classics, like Western classics, there's always some kind of anti-Semitism in them. It's a thing. I still read them because I think if you are aware of the problems behind discrimination in general, if you can separate like things back then from things today, then you should still read classics. I think. You can disagree with me on that if you want to. Next one is Mephisto by Klaus Mann. Apparently this is one of the first books that have been written about the Third Reich because this was already written in 1936 and he already predicted what would happen in the Third Reich in the following years. Okay, that's actually all the classics. So let's go on with contemporary. I think we'll do next, just so we can do the longest one at the end. So the first one in English would be called The White Bone. This is originally an English book by Barbara Gaudi. I have figured out that this follows elephants. The main character is an elephant and it's told from the perspective of these elephants. There are also some like legends that the elephants have. I don't know, but it sounded interesting. The next one is also one that I got from my parents because they know that I want to practice my French a little bit. It's called Le Jour de mon Abandon. Le Jour de mon Abandon by Elena Ferrante. Interestingly, this was actually written in Italian as far as I know. I think that this woman divorces her husband after many years of marriage and she also has children, and I'm gonna guess that somehow her mental state plays a role just because the cover seems to suggest, if you can see that he's like a woman underwater in a house. So yeah, it suggests a story about a woman coming into herself after having been in a very long marriage. Next one is 10 Things That Never Happened by Alexis Hall. This is a romance. This is about Sam Becker, who is like the boss of one of these stores, but his boss, who owns all of the stores, like it's a chain, essentially wants to talk to him because Sam's store just isn't doing as well as it should. And I think it's mattresses that they sell, I'm not sure. And so Sam is called to Nonnen by his boss, Jonathan. And from the blurb, I would say that Jonathan actually wants to fire Sam. However, for some reason, Sam acts like he just forgot everything. The thing is, I wanted to have this for Christmas. So my sister gifted it to me like last year. The thing that I didn't think about is that I hate power dynamics in my books. And there's obviously a power dynamic here if like he's his boss. And also, he's also got some people under him who rely on him to keep their job, because if the store closes down, then they lose their job as well. It's not a relationship that I would say you can build something healthy on. I will still read this. I'm kind of scared of this. Then we got a book that I was gifted by a friend when I moved out, so like 2 years ago, called The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This was also huge on BookTube and BookTok for a while. I have no clue what this is about. She got it and liked it and was like, you haven't read this yet. Here it is. Because it's kind of hard to find books that I haven't read yet for my friends. And we had talked about this, so she knew that I didn't own it yet. The same friend started raving to me about a book when we were 16. I bought it also like 2 years ago. Maybe 1.5 years ago. Still haven't read it. It's called Hello Kitty Must Die by Angela S. Choi. I don't know what this is about either. It's just supposed to have a lot of dark humor, and at some point my friend just she had talked so much about this book that I bought it secondhand and I still haven't read it. It's also a very bright shade of pink. My camera doesn't really pick it up, but it's like neon pink. So it very much stands out from my books. Then we got another book I got at 16. As I said, I had a lot at 16 and I want to reread a lot because I feel like I was very smart at 16, but I feel like I should be smarter now, right? So I got Whiteout by Anne von Kanal, but this only exists in German and French for some reason. Anne von Kanal is actually, I actually only very recently found out that she died in, I think, 2020 or 2022. She was a German author and she was actually kind of well known. And this is, I think this is the book that brought me closest to crying. Because I never cry in books, but this one, it's about a toxic friendship. We follow this young woman who works at one of these science stations at, I think, the South Pole in this case. And she gets an email from her brother just telling her that Scotty has died. And this is a reference to her former best friend. They would always play pretend. They were like these two famous scientists who first tried to get to the, or was it the North Pole? I don't know if it was like the South or the North Pole anymore. But you know, the race to one of the poles. And one of the scientists actually died back then and the other one survived and won the race. And she figures out that her friend, who she would play pretend with, has died. And we follow her memories, essentially. This was like the most toxic friendship. You read about that and you think, please stop being friends. But at the same time you see the love they have for each other. Next one I also got from my brother. It's called Not Forgetting the Whale in English by John Ironmonger. Probably Ironmonger. The whale strands at this coast of a very small town and then the people are in uproar because this shouldn't happen. No clue what else it's about, but I'm going to find out at some point. Okay, then we got Pleading Guilty by Scott Turow. It doesn't have a dust jacket anymore, so there's no blurb anywhere. I only got this because it was like of these public library things where you can just take a book and then give a book back. The German title is Warme Geldhilfe, which doesn't really have translation in English, but the title was just... If you speak German, The Warme Geldhilfe is a good title. Next one, also a gift by a friend. Shout out to that friend. You've gifted me so many books over the time and I have read a lot of them, but not all of them. It's called Waiting for Monsieur Bellivier by Britta Röstlund in English. In German it's just called Das Leben ist eine wunderbare Bredouille. It's about Helena, and when she's asked if she's waiting for Monsieur Bellivier, she just answers with yes, even though she doesn't know who he is. And this is kind of a mystery. And they're like two people, two ordinary lives, two unexpected jobs. We're going with jobs. I'm kind of trying to translate parts of this. Helena and Mancebo don't know each other, but their paths cross. And both discover how great and surprising life can be. Then we got Los Escorpiones by Sarah Barquinero. A Spanish one. It might be an English translation. This is about Sarah and Thomas, who, well, they kind of get involved in a conspiracy, as far as I understand from the blurb. This is also a book that I just want to practice my Spanish with a bit. I have seen it around actually, but I don't know if it's good or not. Those were all of my contemporaries. Now we only need non-fiction. And I'm trying to like be a bit faster because I have flatmates and I thought they weren't here, but they are. And I don't want to disturb them for too long. Next one, A Gift from a Friend. About myths of the classical times. Then we got Prisoners of Geography by Tim Marshall. My mother gave this to me. It's about how geography influences society and history and politics. Honestly, sounds right up my alley. I'm kind of into geopolitics. Next one are Selected Essays by George Orwell. I got 1984 by George Orwell and I didn't like it. I thought it was boring. I thought it could have been half as long and still get its point across, because the problem wasn't that I didn't get it. The problem was just that I didn't want to continue reading it because it was so drawn out. Which is why I got his essays, because I do think that I might like the essays. You know, they're a bit shorter, they get more to the point, hopefully. I haven't started them yet, but I have marked down where the essays are. And I want to read them like one at a time. I don't want to read them all at once, especially since some of them I think require a bit more background knowledge than I currently have. But I would like to start reading like maybe one a month at some point. Maybe next month onwards. Next one is Wie man einen Diktator sagt bekommt by Witold Szablowski. It's a Polish name, and the original is also in Polish, and I don't speak Polish, so I'm sorry if like anything was butchered once again. It's something I got from my brother, and he's also very much into politics, and he thought it might be an interesting read for me because it's about what dictators ate in their lifetime or are still eating. Apparently they found some, I don't know how they figured this out, and I probably have to find out how reliable the sources are. Sounded interesting. Who knows, maybe there are just some good recipes in here that I can copy. Then we got Born a Crime by Trevor Noah. Trevor Noah is a comedian. He's originally from South Africa, and he lives in the US right now. He was born in South Africa during the apartheid, which means that he, as the son of, I think, a black father and a white mother. Maybe it was the other way around, but one of his parents was black and one was white. And he was essentially like a forbidden child at that point, because until very recently black and white people were strictly separated in South Africa. You can still see the effects of that until now. I think he talks a lot about what it was like growing up being somebody that according to law shouldn't exist. So the next one is also a collection of essays by John Stuart Mill this time. It's called On Liberty, Utilitarianism and Other Essays. I've actually already read On Liberty when I was like 17 or 18, so I would like to reread it because I've marked, like I've underlined some things. You can barely see it, but there are some things underlined. And I looked through it and I don't think I would underline the same things anymore, just because of my studies I've learned a lot more about politics and about sociology and ideas that not about John Stuart Mill's ideas, but ideas that have influenced John Stuart Mill. So a lot of the things that back then seemed important to me because I just didn't know them yet would probably not strike me as odd anymore. This is also one that I want to read over time and not in one go, because that would like that would be like way too exhausting. The next one is going to be a bit more controversial, because I own The Wealth of Nations by Adam Smith, which is a very important work for capitalism and at least European liberalism. Liberalism sometimes means something very different in the US than in Europe. In Europe, it's this idea of the open market, of the state not interfering at all, if possible, essentially just of capitalism. And then I also own Karl Marx Das Kapital, which is essentially the opposite of that. This is basically one of the most important works for Marxism. Marxism, communism, and socialism aren't all the same, but they're often equated. I would like to read these back to back, so like one first and then the other one, which is why I haven't done that yet, because I will need a lot of time for this, and I might just do that when I am done with my bachelor's, because I will have some time before I start my master's, and this is just like this very heavy work, obviously. Also, these are not really comparable from what I've heard, just because this is an actual like economic book and this is more about sociology, about society, and those obviously don't quite match, but just because this is one of the most important works for capitalism and the idea of the free market, and this is obviously one of the most important works for Marxism. Also, I think no matter which economic ideology you assign yourself to, it's always good to know as much as possible about every ideology, and even if it's just to be able to counter some arguments. Next one, quite different. I actually bought this in Slovenia, so this isn't one that I took with me from Germany to Slovenia, but it's still my physical TBR. It's called Queens of the Wild, Pagan Goddesses in Christian Europe, and an investigation by Ronald Hutton. This is about like the pagan religion and its myths that was prevalent in Europe before Christianity took over, and we actually, a lot of Christian rituals and traditions actually stem from pagan religions. For example, the whole Easter egg thing actually originated in a pagan religion. I think it was just a sign of fertility back then. Then we got Leadership in Turbulent Times, Lessons from the Presidents by Doris Kearns Goodwin. I read the book Team of Rivals by her, which follows Abraham Lincoln, and that was just amazing. I've talked about before. And this follows several presidents and talks about difficulties during their presidency that they had to overcome and how they solved this. I hope that this doesn't like romanticize the president, so to speak, because obviously like not every president of the US was just a holy figure, but at least in Team of Rivals she didn't make it seem like Abraham Lincoln was just the best man in the world. It actually just seemed to be kind of a neutral retelling, and I hope that this follows that course. Then we got another German one called Das Erbe des Tenors by Wieland Wagner. It's about history in Japan. I don't know anything about history there, which is why I got this. Similar to this, I also got, this is more of like a school textbook, I think, but I have A History of East Asia, From the Origins of Civilization to the 21st Century by Charles Holcomb. My father found this in one of these public libraries somewhere in Scotland, I think, and he decided that this might be something that I find interesting, and it is. I've actually started, I started back then. I underlined a lot, probably because I thought it was all interesting, but I haven't been able to get back to it just yet. I think that Asia is not a region that I know enough about right now. I would like to know a lot more, because it's just not taught in school at all, except for like the Second World War, and then even only like Pearl Harbor. In a similar vein of me wanting to find out more about history that we just don't get taught enough about in school, I got Belonging, The Story of the Jews, 1492 to 1900 by Simon Schama. I got this like 2 years ago as well, before I started studying. It's just the history of Jewish people in Europe, I think, mostly. In Germany, we obviously learn a lot about the Second World War and about the Shoah, or the Holocaust, but we don't really learn much more about the history. We also learn a bit about Jews in medieval times, because in Europe, even back then, they were heavily discriminated against. So that's also something we learn. We learn a lot about myths that existed back then and that even still exist today, but we don't learn a lot about the history of the Jewish people. We don't really learn about Jewish people themselves, about a lot of Jewish people were responsible for a lot of development in Europe, and that's just something that we're kind of missing in the German curriculum, just as we're also missing a lot of people of other groups, Sinti and Roma, women, black people in Europe. Next one are also 2 books. However, this was kind of stupid of me. I got Quantum Mechanics, The Theoretical Minimum by Leonard Susskind and Art Friedman, and General Relativity, The Theoretical Minimum, also by Leonard Susskind, but by André Cabanes as co-author. When I was in school, I wasn't too interested in physics. It just wasn't something that I gravitated towards. And I wouldn't say that I regret it, because I don't really need it from day-to-day life, but it's still something that I found an interest in the past couple of years, and I bought these wanting to learn more. However, something I didn't realize, I think this is book 2 and this is book 4 in a series. I don't own book 1 and 3. This follows like lectures by Leonard Susskind. Apparently you can even watch them on YouTube, which is great, but I have to get book 1 and 3 to read these. Also, if you're wondering why I took them with me to Slovenia instead of giving them to my father, because I'm not gonna get book 1 and 3 in the year that I'm studying here. I'm asking that myself right now. I could just have given these to my father and get them in the time between my bachelor's and master's. Weil they're here now. The next one is Im Spiegel der Sprache, warum die Welt in anderen Sprachen anders aussieht, by Guy Deutscher. Deutsch is the German term for German, which I find funny, because this is a book about language and about why languages differ and how languages shape our world. Like, for example, I think there are some languages that have different kinds of color than German does, and for them a lighter shade of blue and a darker shade of blue are 2 entirely separate colors, while for me they would be the same color, just in different shades. Next one we have is How to Take Over the World by Ryan North. I already read this, 5 stars. Short summary: if you know these what if books, it's that. It's a lot of fun facts, but he acts like you want to be a supervillain. It's amazing. The next one is called Femina, A New History of the Middle Ages Through the Women Written Out of It in English, by Janina Ramirez. I've got the German version, which is called Femina, eine neue Geschichte des Mittelalters aus Sicht der Frauen. In my first semester of university, I had to take a course in history, and I took one that was about cities in medieval Europe. And that was very interesting, because in one of her lectures, the professor talked about women and about how they actually shaped medieval cities and how they influenced them, and that they weren't just people who stayed at home. They were working, they weren't even... We have this idea of medieval women having a lot less rights than men, and in some cases they did, but not as much as we often think. So when I saw this, I just had to get it. Next one is I think this is purely German, at least I don't imagine there is a English translation to this, because it's about German emperors, by S. Fischer-Fabian. It's called Die Deutsche Kaiser, Triumph und Tragödie. Der Herrscher des Mittelalters, which would translate to the German emperors, triumph and tragedies of the rulers of the Middle Ages. I think it's clear what it should be about. This one I actually didn't find an English translation for, even though it was written in Finnish. Apparently was only translated into German. It's called Putins Krieg gegen die Frauen, which would translate to Putin's War Against Women, by Sophie Oksana. And I mean, I guess it's also kind of clear what this is about. Vladimir Putin, you know, the president of Russia, in case you don't know somehow. He has very traditional ideas, and the role a woman should take in his society, in his ideal society, is very traditional, and that's something that this book is about how that influences women and their life in Russia, and what the consequences might be, not just for people living in Russia, but also for like society of the world, I guess. While we're talking about Putin, I got this like very big edition of His Life and Times, Putin, by Philip Short. This was, as you can see here, there's like a mark which meant that this was on sale, which doesn't really happen a lot in Germany. It's just a biography of Vladimir Putin I think it goes up to 2020 or maybe 2021. It mentions a lot of sources in the back, which is always a good sign. Oh, here's a young Vladimir Putin. Apparently he went to school in Leningrad. Next one is by Angelika Nussberger, Das Völkerrecht. If you know these little introduction series by Oxford, I think they are, this is basically the German equivalent. I haven't read any of these yet. This is also the only one I own. This is about international law. It's very short. Should be a quick and easy read. I also already know some about international law because of my studies and because of personal interest. But I decided that I still wanted to have like this quick explanation of different aspects of it. Next one is called Nachts im Kanzleramt by Marietta Slomka. This is about, just general about politics in Germany, how it works, how the system functions. I am going to read this month. I am afraid of being bored by it just because it seems to be a very general book, and as I said, I'm studying something with politics. I already learned a lot about it, and I've had an interest in politics since I was like 13. So let's see if there's anything new in here for me. Then we got The World of Family History by Simon Sebag Montefiore. This is just like a very big book about world history, but following different families, like famous families. I started this in case you haven't seen the reading vlogs, but I stopped reading at a point where you can stop because I wanted to read some other books first. But I will be coming back to this. The next one is called Two Wheels Good, The History and Mystery of the Bicycle by J.D. Rosen. I love riding my bicycle. I will ride for 2 to 6 hours if I can. Unfortunately, I only got a very bad one over here. But back at my mama's place, there's a better one. And I have ridden my bicycle for 2 weeks through the Netherlands with a tent on the back of the bicycle. And that was my holiday. Was fantastic, it was amazing. And so when I saw this book, it just made sense to find out more about the history of this amazing vehicle. Okay, I think this is the last one. It's called The Balkans, 1804 to 2012, Nationalism, War and the Great Powers by Misha Glenny. It's about the Balkans. The Balkans is a very interesting region. It has a lot of history, but I don't know a lot about it. And since I did move to Slovenia, which I think in this book it isn't even counted as one of the Balkan countries, but it shares a lot of history with it, and it definitely at least neighbors the Balkans if it isn't counted as a Balkan state itself. I think it's kind of contested what actually counts as the Balkans, but I thought it might be good to just know a little bit more about the region than I currently do. And that's it. That's all the 66 books I have with me in Slovenia. I am planning on getting rid of all the books that are 3 stars or lower at some point. Some of them will just be thrown away, but I would also like to either donate some or put them in a public library. I just haven't found the spot yet. But that's it for now. Thank you for watching. I hope you saw some interesting books that maybe you haven't seen before, and I'll see you very soon.